recording. Okay, so this morning we have another great speaker, Judy Winkler, and she's freshly back from Paris. So you'll sense a little bit of the accent, which is lovely. Judy spent, gosh, 18 years in Paris, and she's been with a number of really top tier companies in her career, and now she spends her time as a leadership coach. She focuses on workshops and facilitating leadership meetings. And so I want to acknowledge her and her expertise. And she does a lot of fun things. So if you want information on Paris, I'm sure she would be a great one to reach out to and get additional info. So Judy, welcome to our universe here. And we're excited to hear you speak. And I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And good morning, everybody. It's so great to see you. This is such a great idea. And I'd like to just start sharing my screen, but I'm getting a message. I cannot start screen share while the other participant is sharing.
There you go. Now you can.
Okay. All right. Let me just bring up my presentation. So it's a pleasure to be here with you on this Friday morning. And thank you so much for the introduction, Christy, appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to talking to you a little bit about 4 keys to great business communication. I'd like to start with a story about leadership communication. These numbers tell a story. Only 7% of employees agree that communication in their workplace is accurate, timely, and open. And only 22% believe that their leaders have a clear direction for the organization. 2/3 of employees are not engaged, or they are actively disengaged. And $64.2 million is the average yearly cost of inadequate communication. This lack of effective communication impacts not only employee engagement and the bottom line, but it also makes it very hard to build trust, to rally people around a common cause or a future vision, to successfully achieve organizational change. So communication, and leadership communication in particular, is a major factor in leadership success and also in leadership failure. There's one more number I'd like to share with you, 75. 75% of the coaching conversations that I've had with leaders over the past decade have to do with some form of communication. So I'm hearing them describe things like this, where everybody's talking and nobody's hearing, or situations like this as well. Even had a leader say, they don't speak the same language as I do. And so the question becomes, how come? Why is this happening? Why is this so pervasive? So I started to notice what it was that resonated with leaders and what it was that the things that they felt were helping them really make a difference in their communications. And I'd like to share some of them with you today. The first key is to partner with science, neuroscience to be specific. Let's start with a couple of examples. If this is the course of a communication, whether it's a presentation, a conversation, a meeting, at the beginning, your audience will be retaining about 70% of the content. But in the middle, that drops deeply, sharply into 20% until you come to the end, in conclusion, and retention goes back up to 100%. Now, this is a natural brain pattern that happens. Now, you might think that the longer ago something was, the more difficult it will be to remember, but that's not the case. And Why? Because of the way that the brain functions. So the old brain, that part of your brain that's responsible for fight or flight, that's keyed into emotions, is lighting up at the beginning of this conversation and assessing risk. Am I going to, is this a risky situation I haven't encountered before? And as soon as they realize there's nothing new coming here, it goes to sleep right in the middle of your presentation, right where you have the meat. Their brains are on cruise control until someone says, and in summary, or to summarize the key points, and then the brain lights up again and realize there's been a change and I need to assess it. And when it is at 100%, the retention is complete. So what can you do to counteract this normal brain pattern that we all have? Well, let's start by grabbing attention right at the beginning with a hot opening. Then throughout, spike it by changing the way you communicate, by changing the modalities, changing many, many things that we'll be looking at today. And at the end, finish strong, grabbing attention again with a hot close. Now, these numbers are for immediate recall. So the person walks out of the meeting, finishes the presentation, and immediately this is what they recall. But an hour later, that recall and that retention has diminished down to 50%. 8 hours later, at the end of the day, down to 25%. And 3 days later, 10% is all that is left. But it doesn't have to be that way. Turns out that our brains are not wired for facts and figures, but they are wired for story and emotions. You can change these brain patterns, because why even have the conversation if people are not going to remember the main points in there? This model is from Corporate Visions, who are specifically focused on sales and marketing messaging, and they call it appropriately the hammock. So let's look at some examples. We said, oh, after 3 days, we only have a 10% retention of the content, but you can make that shoot up by 6 or 7 times to 65% by adding a simple visual. This is called the picture superiority effect, and it's been around for a long time, been researched for a long time. Now, the type of visual also matters. So the most effective is that whiteboard type of visual that's moving. So either you're actually writing on a whiteboard or you're writing on a virtual whiteboard, like in this presentation, or you're using a flip chart. Or how many times have I been in a one-on-one and I've just grabbed a piece of paper to sketch out a model or a diagram that supports my point? So this is why the picture superiority effect is why it's easier for us to read a map than a list of instructions. Turn right at the second street, then go ahead for 200 meters, then turn left. And it's the same reason why a coach in sports will draw the play instead of saying, oh, number 50, you need to go to the right, and number 14, stay back and then go to the left. The picture superiority effect, the brain really grabs onto that. Another thing the brain likes is contrast. So contrast is all around us in our world, everything from a checkerboard to nature and foods, and even your invitation for today shows effective use of contrast. And here you can see for yourselves which one is easier for your brain to capture and understand more quickly, more contrast or less contrast. So the brain likes this in a figurative sense as well. So when you're communicating a customer success story, you might want to show how it was for the customer before as well as after. How about when you're communicating a strategy or a new initiative? Well, you might want to have a look at where you've come from together before you look, as well as where you are going. Everything from team performance to individual coaching can always benefit from contrast, helps the brain immensely. So we've looked at several things here. It's the old brain. What is it like? It likes spikes. It likes variety, difference, diversity. It likes visuals, things to be visually presented. We're visual beings, contrast, and emotions. And we're going to come back to this one because it's such a big one that we really do connect, even when we're talking about facts and figures at an emotional level. So these are just a few of the neuroscientific research areas that are being done today. And this field is just exploding. And we're seeing a lot more research around applied neuroscience. So how can we use this in a business context? The second key is captivate your audience by building a bridge. In working with leaders, talking about their audiences, the one question that I ask that most often elicits that wide-eyed, blank stare, deer in the headlights, is what's important to them? Let's forget the content for a moment, and what is important to your audience? What are they interested in? What are they passionate about? So many times we're so focused on our own point of view, on our own content, on our own message, that we don't take enough time to really understand what it's like coming from the other side. One time I was coaching a leader in Canada, and I was asking him these kinds of questions. He was challenged by a peer that had a different viewpoint on how resources should be allocated in a major project. And I was asking these kinds of questions. It was clear he was struggling, hesitating, not finding. But I kept at it, maybe asking them a different way, giving a few tips here and there. And at one point he paused and I said, really, what is it that's important to them? And he said, hockey. If you've never been in Canada during a hockey championship, it's a unique experience. Hockey plays a role in the Canadian psyche and esprit, which is really different and very, very recognizable. And then he was off and running. That opened the door. And then he came up with all kinds of things on a business level and personal level of what was important so that he could connect better with this peer. Now, there are many different ways that you can connect to your audience. Have a look here at a short clip of Bill Gates giving a TED Talk on malaria, and notice all the ways that he connects and builds a bridge to his audience.
Paradox that because the disease is only in the poor countries, it doesn't get much investment. For example,
We don't have the sound on this.
Share sound.
Do you have
When-
sound?
Right. When you share the screen, you have to tick a box on the bottom left of the share
Okay.
screen that allows you to share the computer sound, and then we can hear that.
Sorry.
No problem.
All right, let's try that again. I've clicked that box now, but now I'm frozen. So you might want to get some, I'm going to have to stop share and reopen my, you might want to get some cream for your coffee, and I probably need something a little stronger in my coffee until I get this going. So let me try that one more time.
Okay.
Here we go.
Are you almost there?
Okay. This is not what I want. I'm so sorry. I'm going to put some cognac in mine.
Oh,
I just had the wrong.
okay.
Okay, here
There
we go.
we go.
All right, and now because I had to open it again, so sorry. All right, are you ready now for Bill Gates? Let's hope you can hear him this
Yes,
time.
thank you.
The paradox that because the disease is only in the poor countries, it doesn't get much investment. For example, there's more money put into baldness drugs than are put into malaria. Now, baldness it's a terrible thing. And rich men are afflicted. And so that's why that priority has been set. But malaria, even the million deaths a year caused by malaria greatly understate its impact. Over 200 million people at any one time are suffering from it. Means that you can't get the economies in these areas going because it holds things back so much. Now, malaria is, of course, transmitted by mosquitoes. I brought some here so you could experience this. We'll let those roam around the auditorium a little bit. There. There's no reason only poor people should have the experience. Those mosquitoes are not infected, but.
All right, so many ways in such a short time. Really effective use of humor, irony, the unexpected. We love the unexpected. It connects us to the other person. And of course, very good use of a prop of the mosquitoes. And he also did a really good job of something else that we call multi-channel communications. And the first channel is that factual channel. He shared facts and figures about malaria for those people who like to capture those kind of information in that way. The second channel is emotional. So he talked about 1 million deaths a year. He used words like suffering to connect on an emotional level to the audience. And the third channel is symbolic, which of course the mosquitoes representing the spread of this deadly disease. And this multi-channel model is documented in a book called The Leader's Voice by Boyd Clark and Ron Crossland. So part of how you build a bridge to your audience depends on what you're trying to achieve. For example, do you need to understand their point of view better? Then you may want to use a tool like perceptual positions, which is based on neurolinguistic programming. And it takes you, it's a deeper look at how you can be that other person for a little while and truly see that subject through their eyes. One of my very favorites, perceptual positions. Or maybe you need to correlate your message with their passion. You need to literally find that bridge. And then you may want to use a tool which puts that out and helps you to clarify those connections so that you build them into your communication. Or maybe you want to influence people. I've had leaders tell me, you know, every single conversation I had yesterday was about influencing somebody. So a big part of leaders' time is spent trying to influence others. There are a plethora of tools out there for helping you to design your influence communication. And they mostly have different entry points or viewpoints. So it depends really what you're trying to achieve with your audience. Now, all of these tools and many more that are available are used before you ever walk into that conversation or step on that stage. And so, of course, you can't, do this analysis for every single communication that you do. But when the stakes are high, you might want to consider a little bit of preparation in this way and also some practice. So another excellent way to build a bridge and connect with your audience is actually the third key, and that is become a master storyteller. Let's start by spending a couple of minutes with Neil Bearden as he illustrates the power of a well-told story.
First student walks in, sits down, gets asked, "Why do you want to work in private equity?" "I studied engineering at MIT. I have a very strong quantitative background, spent 4 years at Goldman Sachs after that. Now I'm finishing up my MBA at Harvard Business School. I've taken all the finance classes, private equity classes. I'm very strong quantitatively. I really love finance." Bravo, impressive. Next student comes in, student number 2, sits down. "Why do you want to work in private equity?" "Yeah, my CV, you see that I went to MIT, I studied engineering, I've got the quant, I spent 4 years at Goldman, now I'm finishing up at HBS. But the real reason I didn't appreciate it until yesterday, I called my dad last night, told him I was coming to this interview. I said, 'Dad, they're going to ask me why I want to work in private equity. I need a good answer.' First thing my dad asked me was, 'What's private equity?' I explained to him. As soon as I did, he said, 'You tell him it's because of bicycles.' 'What do you mean bicycles?' I said, 'Remember those broken down, abandoned bicycles in the neighborhood? You kept bringing them home, put it in the garage, sandpaper it, spray paint it, take your toothbrush outside, get all the rust off the chain. What'd you brush your teeth with anyway? Squirt WD-40 on it, replace the inner tube, sell it to some kid in the neighborhood for $100. You always had way more money than your friends from selling those bicycles. So if I understand you correctly, son, you explain to him tomorrow that it's what you've been doing since you were 12 years old. You sell bicycles. They need to hire you.' Partner goes home that evening, is having dinner with her husband. He says, 'How's recruiting going? Did you meet anyone interesting?' She says, 'You will not believe this. I met this guy today. He said we should hire him because he's interested in finance.' No, she's already forgot about him. He's gone. She's going to go home, tell the bicycle story to her husband that night. 10 years later, when the bicycle story guy is being promoted to partner in the firm, she's going to retell the bicycle story again now at his celebration. She's going to toast him, say, 'You'll never believe what this sucker told me,' retell the bicycle story to the people in the room, and she'll be able to remember it 10 years later. $100 becomes $300 because of inflation, but more or less it's the same story. Now, why does she do that? Why did she hire him instead of quant finance guy? Because she knows that in a year or 2 years from now, or maybe immediately, he's going to be sent to Thibodaux, Louisiana, to meet Wade Boudreaux, who has a cement company. He's going to have to play golf with Wade Boudreaux and make Wade Boudreaux want to do business with him. Does Wade Boudreaux want to do business with quantitative I like finance guy or with the bicycle guy? If you know anything about Wade Boudreaux, you know what the answer is. Stories are going to create connections, generate sales, increase clients, all the stuff that matters. The CV stuff, that's there. That's impressive. That mattered a long time ago. What's going to matter in the future, much, much more, is the ability to connect, to tell stories. Stories.
All right. So he does a great job of demonstrating and showing, using contrast, the difference that telling a good story can make. I find it so interesting to compare the style between Bill Gates and Neil Bearden. Completely different. And this is one of the big, powerful aspects of storytelling. Everybody brings their own style, their own background, their own life experience to telling the story. So every story and every storyteller is unique. So the next question is, how do you do that? How do you become a master storyteller? And storytelling has been in our leadership repertoire for a long time now. And so there are a lot of models out there. There are a lot of methodologies. You can even take a course that helps you to become a better storyteller. And of course, the TED Talks and YouTubes are unlimited. Or you can just observe people that you think tell good stories and emulate some of their techniques. If you're just getting started telling stories in a business setting, or if you want to refresh, I really recommend to spend 20 or 30 minutes with this Harvard Business Review article, The 4 Truths of the Storyteller by Peter Guber, who brings not only his experience from Hollywood, but also as an author and a storyteller to these 4 truths that a story should always be true to the teller, to the audience, to the moment, and to the mission. But in addition to that, he brings wonderful examples. So he shows you how these concepts can be applied and should be applied in real stories and the impact that that has. Another one of my favorites, 4 Truths of the Storyteller. Now, a big part of many effective stories is analogies and metaphors. They are all over our ordinary language. In fact, we spend most of the day talking in metaphors and analogies without even realizing it. And they have long been used in branding and marketing. Here are some of the iconic ones you may remember. Every single one, an analogy or a metaphor. Now, analogies and metaphors need to be skillfully used. If not, you're headed right back to the blah, 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 or you're sending your audience into the hammock because they have no clue what you're talking about. So there are some do's and don'ts of analogies and metaphors. So the first do is it needs to be relatable to the audience. So if you take the Canadian hockey example with me, it's going to go right over my head. You've lost me before we even started. So make sure it's relatable to your audience. The next thing is there must be a lot of clarity in the correlation between the analogy and the business topic. And how do you do that? By having effective transitions. I remember I was coaching a very talented leader one time, and he was challenged because he said his colleagues, and he worked in a large enterprise, would all come to him. And he was a bottleneck instead of coming to his team, who were the actual subject matter experts on the various topics. And he just kept repeating it. No matter which questions I asked, he was really stuck in this repeating the problem, which we often do when we haven't really got clarity on a solution yet. And so at one point I said to him, you know, now I live in Southern California and I hear the foghorns and I see the lighthouses. And I know that those lighthouses are there to be a safe haven for the ships and to guide them as they come to shore. You remind me of that lighthouse. For whatever reason, your colleagues see you as the safe haven. They see you as the guiding light. The only question is to figure out why. And that was just enough to get him to realize that he was acting like the lighthouse, and the only solution started with him, needed to start with him. So being clear, having a clear analogy really can be helpful. And the last do is it needs to be meaningful to you. If you have found a wonderful analogy, but you have no skin in the game, it doesn't really relate to you, it's just an analogy, your audience will sense that. Even if they can't put their finger on it, they will know that lack of authenticity. So that's a number 1 rule. As on the don't side, don't overuse or underuse metaphors and analogies, right? If you overuse them, you lose your audience completely. If you underuse them, you miss an opportunity. Be careful about buzzwords. You know, the buzzwords change every few years. Some of the ones I'm hearing now are a narrative. Everything's a narrative. Well, maybe it's a story, maybe it's an example, but what's a narrative? At the end of the day, people always saying at the end of the day, unprecedented. There are different ones. We all have different ones. So be careful about that, as well as jargon. Now, if you have an audience where you all share the same jargon, I can remember working in high tech, we'd get in a room full of engineers and it was jargon city because we all knew it, we all shared it, it was our reality. But particularly in a diverse audience, you need to be really careful about that. Same with filler words. You're just going to banish all of the ums, the uhs, the so, and the ands, everything that is a filler word just detracts from your content. And the last don't is don't use analogies just to use an analogy. They need to have a purpose. So an analogy or a metaphor should give context or provide clarity or aid in the memory of the content. So the last thing is to remember that every story is a journey that you take your audience on. And there's a website, a company called Sparkle, and they have a lot of resources about stories on their website. And here are a couple of my favorites. Particularly this one on the left, the 8 classic storytelling techniques are really more than techniques, they're structures. So how can you structure your story? So as you get more sophisticated in your storytelling, you may want to do things like having nested stories or nested analogies, or use more sophisticated structures to give a little bit more pizzazz to your storytelling. And the one on the right, the 7 universal story plots, are your classic ones like the quest, the rebirth, overcoming the monster, like the Star Wars model, right? And the thing I like about this one is it gives you examples of stories that you or I would tell and suggestions of which of the story plots might be best suited for that kind of story. So Sparkle, lots of resources for you there. And the last key is connect to emotions. I said we were coming back to this because it plays such a key role in every communication, whether we know it or not. This quote you may be familiar with already, one of my faves from the author Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said and they will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And nowhere is that more prevalent than in the workplace. Emotions are everywhere if you just open your eyes and look for them. So after decades of banning emotions from the workplace, we're now recognizing the value of things like emotional intelligence, things like empathy, and the role of emotions in everything from inspiration to innovation to team performance. The list just goes on and on. One thing to remember is there are a lot of emotions. I think the phrase someone is emotional has gotten a bad rap. It's got sort of a pejorative or a negative connotation to it. But there are so many emotions and so many ways that you can find to connect to them. So it really, really can be a powerful component in your communication strategy. I was teaching a workshop one time, and the assignment for the participants was, we were talking about delegation. So instead of them as leaders delegating, they were supposed to tell a story about a time when they received a delegated task and succeeded. One of my participants shared the story, and he was in a production environment. This is not his factory, but it looks pretty similar to what he described. And he was rotated into this factory, and it was a mess. There were problems with the processes. There were problems with the people. There were problems with the technology. And he had 8 months to see what he could do. And so he told this story about what he was able to accomplish in those 8 months before he was rotated to his next position. And he achieved some successes, but not all of the ones that he had hoped for. And one of the other participants says, "Oh, that must have been horrible, just dreadful to be rotated into such an environment." And his answer was, "I would do it again in a heartbeat." "Why?" the other one asked. And he said, "Because I can't wait to take the ride again. So I think we all underestimate the power of emotions in a very, very positive way. And I'm not saying you never talk about negative emotions. Remember that contrast, right? So I can only encourage you to find ways to connect to your audience's emotions, no matter who they are. If we look at emotions, then we can come back to our first key, which was partnering with neuroscience, where we talked about the fact that the brain loves emotions, among other things. Next, we talked about captivating your audience, which you can use emotions to do that. And you can also use neuroscientific principles to captivate your audience better. Becoming a master storyteller, we learned that the brain is wired for stories and emotions, and that stories are a great way to build that bridge to your audience as well. And so the 4 keys to great business communication are all interrelated. But as you can see, the puzzle is far from complete. Not only can you go much deeper into these 4, there are so many other elements that contribute to making a great communication. Like leadership, communication is a never-ending story. If I were to ask you, everybody here on this call, if you've seen the movie E.T., the Extraterrestrial, I would probably get the same response I usually do. And all of you, or most of you, would say, yes, I have. I've probably asked hundreds of leaders all around the world what E.T. always said. And the answer is always the same. I get a chorus back of phone home. And they all say it, even using E.T.'s voice as best they can. 39 years later, everybody remembers. Steven Spielberg is one of the great storytellers of our time. Throughout all the hype and the Hollywood and the high tech, he has remained successful. And part of that reason is because he stays relentlessly focused on the story. So before you start that next meeting or step onto the stage or fire up Zoom for your next meeting, ask yourselves, how will I tell my story? So if you'd like to learn more or practice choreographing your communications better, I offer communications and leadership coaching, and you can see my contact details here. So I'd like to thank you all for being here and for participating, for listening. And I'd like to turn it back over to Christy for questions and answers.
Right. Thank you, Judy. This resonated with so many people. I was getting some private chats. Oh my gosh, the emotion side. So you said a lot of really great things, and I love it. The stories are so important. But it was interesting. I didn't think of the story part being in your leadership activities, and that was really an aha for me. Your stories with interviewing, that makes sense. Stories in presentations, that makes sense. But the leadership ones, I thought was really interesting. So if anybody has questions, please put it in the chat. We want to make sure that we get Judy to answer it while she's here with us. And so the other thing was pictures. And it's interesting. I gave a little talk last night and I used a lot of pictures, and mostly because I was tired of writing words. And what I found was people did engage more. I liked your trough thing, and I thought it was really interesting. And because the PowerPoint presentations for people are boring anymore.
Yeah, the brain just goes to sleep. I mean, we have seen so much PowerPoint.
Yeah, but is this just, is this a recent thing or has it been evolving that way?
It has been evolving. I would say the last decade has really accelerated it. So many of the workshops that I have done in leadership, but also in sales and marketing and even customer service, much of it is done. There are some PowerPoint slides. Are things that PowerPoint or a display are really good for, but much of it I do on a flip chart, real time, as we are there in the classroom. So there's something about them seeing me in this case, or each other, because then they do it a lot as well, move. That motion and the creation of that visual is very effective. Now, some of the slides I use today, I would never attempt to try and do on a flip chart. So you have to kind of decide. But yeah, it's been evolving and coming, and we're realizing this extreme. And I think COVID probably accentuated our realization of how tired we really have become.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Okay, we have a question. Any tips to avoiding filler words? Most of the times we're not even aware we're using them. Okay, so full disclosure, the word "so" I use, and I have to consciously remember not to use it. How do we do that? How does it get to a point where it's more automatic?
So stop. What I have done and suggested to others, what works best for me, is you need to practice. So there's a difference. First of all, realize the difference between preparation and practice. They are absolutely not the same thing. And your brain is in a completely different place when you're preparing than when you're practicing. So now I can say so because I'm comparing two things, but I can't say it in the beginning before I have two things to compare. What you need to do, or what I did and what I've suggested to other leaders, is practice. And the first time you say a filler, you stop and you start over at the beginning. And you do it again. And the first time you say a filler, you stop and you go way back to the beginning and you start again. And pretty soon,
Like that.
you stop using those filler words because you're thinking, I'm never going to get to practice the last 10 minutes of this thing because I can't get there.
I love that. And what I'm trying to do is when I'm talking with my husband, I try and I'll consciously focus on eliminating that word. I'm getting better at it, but it's still awful. Okay, lots of other questions. How does pace of speech, coming from somebody who naturally talks very quickly, help or hinder communication?
Wow.
Or how do you slow down? Okay, so
how do you slow down?
Yeah, how do you slow down? But sometimes the pace at which people talk, I think sometimes people talk too slow. So here's an example. Every time I listen to Gavin Newsom, I put it on 1.5 speed, a recording on, because he talks too slow. And my brain, it's like, I get really frustrated. It's like, come on, dude, land that.
Yeah, I think the answer to that, and I tend to talk more slowly in every language. So, every language that I can speak. So, it's something that the answer is it depends. So first thing, it depends. Do you have a lot of non-native English speakers in your audience? Whoa, then you better slow it down and articulate. To a non-native English speaker, American English sounds a lot like you have a potato in your mouth and you're not articulating.
I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, crisply. So it depends, right? I try to speed up a little bit, but if I try to speed up too much, I will be, number one, I become inauthentic to my own style. And number two, I start tripping over my words because it's so unnatural for me. Try to hit a middle ground, I would say. Your point is well taken, Christy. If people are used to thinking really fast and the speaker is very slow, your brain has trouble staying engaged because the rhythms are there's too big of a gap.
Okay. So bottom line, bottom line is to really try to be aware of it, right? And
Try to be aware, analyze your audience the best you can. So I came into this audience, I don't know who you are going to be. So I tried to make middle of the road throughout my presentation. I tried to do the 4 truths of the storyteller.
Okay. Another question, Bill Laser asks, what if you don't know whether a metaphor, an analogy, or an analogy will land with your audience if you don't know who will show up in the audience? Seems hard to know sometimes. So how do you guess?
A lot of it is culture. For me, it's cultural. Okay, so I lived in and worked in a very international environment for a long time. If you know that you have a lot of Americans, if you know that you have a lot of Canadians, hockey, even people who don't watch hockey, cannot escape hockey. It's just all that I would go to a restaurant and on the television is hockey, and people at work are talking about hockey. So you can pretty much assume that they will understand at least and relate to some degree to a hockey analogy. Whereas you go to Mexico and talk about a hockey analogy, never snows in Mexico, so they can't relate. So try to if you don't know specifically your audience, in your case, I know your leaders, that's all I know. So I use leadership analogies.
Okay, that's a good one. We have lots of questions, so let's see how many we can get through. Someone asks, do you, as leaders, do you suggest we incorporate more emoticons into our presentations, social media posts, and emails, etc.? Do they authentically convey emotion, and do younger generations appreciate it?
So now you're going to get Judy's version of this, right? Judy's view, because I think, if somebody else may have a different view. I personally would not use emoticons in an email. I would use them very sparingly in any kind of business context. I think there are other ways to reach people emotionally. We are going to have emoticon fatigue. I think we already have emoticon fatigue, just like we have PowerPoint fatigue. You want them, if you take one thing away from today, is you want to be different. Our brains are saturated. We are collectively tired. The way that you can counteract that in any kind of communication, whether it's a one-on-one, a stage presentation, or a meeting, is to do something different. If you have a weekly meeting with your team, start it differently each time. Don't say, okay, here we are. Today's agenda is project review, blah, blah. They're out of there, man. They are thinking about their next email while you are talking. So do something different. And emoticons are no longer different. And I didn't even like them in business.
Okay, here's another question. What is your observation or insight on how storytelling approach or style is different generationally with Gen Z, millennials, or millennials versus Gen X or boomers?
I've worked with a lot of leaders who are Gen X or, well, the only Gen Z, or what are we calling them? Gen Z, is that what we're calling them? Is the only one, because they're not really in leadership positions yet. But millennials are now, in case you haven't noticed, in a lot of leadership positions. And Gen X is there. They seem to be kind of a smaller generation, but they are there. And of course, baby boomers. And between those three, I have to be very frank and say, I have not seen a lot of difference. I have seen stories from millennials that will knock your socks off. They are so talented. It's like each generation is cable ready, right? They're born with part of what we had to acquire. Well, I speak for myself, what I had to acquire, right? So I have not seen, I have a millennial friend, she's 33. We were out having dinner with her and another friend. And about halfway through the dinner, she just stops and goes, you know, Judy, no matter what we're talking about, you always have a story. And I said, well, is that good or not? And she said, it's the best. I really haven't seen a big difference in those 3 generations.
That's good. Okay, so somebody else asks, my impression is almost all non-professional presenters use way more words than needed, perhaps double the number they really need. For this, as with many things, wouldn't it make sense to record and run through and look for all of the things to delete or clean up?
That could be a good exercise to do in your preparation. That comes into practice. You know,